wrong in the world, and I wish things were different, 'cause I've got a little girl. The more we talk about it, the more we're giving it life. The more we stress about it, we're bringing stress to our lives. If you want love, if you want peace, if you want a better world for all humanity, be the change, be the change that you want to see. Oh, be the change that you want to see. Be peaceful if you want to have peace. If you want love, then love you should be. Be the change that you want to see. Yeah. Be the change that you want to see. I wanted revolution. I wanted to take a stand, tear down injustice, and lift up the common man. Without love, it's pointless anyway. I decided to be loved so that I could make a change, yeah. If you want love, if you want love, if you want peace, if you want peace, if you want a better world for all humanity, be the change, be the change, oh, be the change that you want to see. Oh, be the change that you want to see. Oh, be peaceful if you want to have peace. If you want love, then love you should be. Be the change that you want to see. Yeah, be the change that you want to see. What the world needs now is a little more love. What the world needs now is just a little more of your peace. Oh, love, we've got to be. Yeah, be the change that you want to see. Spread your love all around. It's time to get off the sideline. I need you, and I know you need me.
Do you see your eyes when you look at me? Do you hear your voice when you hear me sing? I know now that we are one. When I'm hurting you, I am hurting me. When I'm loving you, I am loving me. I know now that we are one. 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 There is no separation. We are one. When I'm judging you, I am judging me. When I'm praising you, I am praising me. I know now that we are one. And when I'm fearing you, I'm afraid of me. When I see God in you, I see God in me. I know now that we are one. 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 We are one.
Hello, hello, hello. Happy Sunday, beautiful people.
Happy
It
Sunday.
is so good to see you. It is so good to be here with you. As it is a good day, we are going to begin,
Always a
as
good
we
day.
always do, with prayer. And today, our prayer champion, Lavonda Elam, will lead us in prayer.
Yes, yes.
Good morning, Celebration Spiritual Center. Life is happening, and this is a good place to be. So, in that knowing, let us take in a generous breath as we move inward and align in the one power, the one spirit, the one presence of good that is here. Eternal light of wholeness and sweet generosity, how good it is to stand on the ground of gratitude for the life that is ours today. I recognize as I align and accept the omniscience, the omnipotence of the omnipresence of all that you are as the very essence of my life and the very essence of each life that is tuned in here today. God of good, God of love, I'm so grateful for the reservoir of infinite presence that you are everywhere, here in our minds and our hearts and our spirits and our various spaces, places, and times. I'm so grateful that yours is the sacred and connected tissue that binds us all, that sustains the united soul and spirit of CSC. And it feels so good to know that wherever we are right here, we are surely here by divine appointment. So as I'm knowing today in this appointed time, there is not a care in the world that can't and isn't already being taken care of. So we are good today to push that button of release to the altar of unconditional love and freedom that lifts and takes it all away. As we stand free and clear, remembering who we belong to, belonging to the infinite spirit of know-how and absolute doing. So it is from this place of belonging that I speak with confidence and clarity that this service is steeped in love, that it is divinely guided, and that it is prosperously and abundantly blessed, and that we all benefit today. I speak with confidence, knowing that our faithful and faithful pastors are standing by, ready to move us toward a higher ground as messengers of truth in song, in meditation, and in the word that is dropped here today. I pray that our wells are wide open to receive. Swimming in gratitude, I love saying these three words. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for the love that CSC is built on. Thank you, God, for the life that is our community and our amazing sustenance. Thank you, beloved Spirit, for every blessing, past, present, and still yet to come. May our wells be wide open to receive. In blessed assurance, I release this prayer in great expectation of a mighty good day and a mighty good service as I speak this prayer on the spirit of grace and on the knowing of an amen, ashe, and so it is. Let us be in it today.
Yes, yes. Amen, Ashe. And
So
so
it
it
is.
is. Well, again, I want to say welcome to each and every person that's here. I want to especially welcome our first-time guests. If this is your first time connecting with us, the first time tapping in and connecting to the stream of well-being that is Celebration Spiritual Center, we're so happy to have you. Please feel free to shout yourself out in the comments. Let us know where you're connecting from. We know folks have been joining us from all over the country and all over the world. And if you are a first-time guest, we want to stay in touch with you. We want to be able to let you know what's going on with us and send you some wonderful information. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out every Friday. And all you have to do is just text the word welcome to the number you see here on your screen, 347-472-1078. Just the word welcome, no additional signature or emojis, and you'll receive an automated prompt back that will ask you for your information. And then you'll be all set, and you'll get all the wonderful information and helpful links that we share in our announcements. So with that, let's get into the announcements before we get into the meditation. So the first thing is we have a COVID-19 update. Again, we want to thank everyone who participated in the survey, giving us some valuable information.
And what we've shared at the outset of doing that survey is that all of this is predicated on what's going on with Restoration Plaza and when we can actually move in. And we did have a conversation with Restoration Plaza this past week, and what the building is doing. They have hired and engaged a consulting firm to support them in doing everything that is required for the safety and well-being of every person, including all of you. So what that means is it'll be quite some time before anyone is able to really return to restoration in the way that we're used to. So as far as 2020 goes, we will not be holding any in-person services. We're remaining as we are. There will be no in-person services or classes, and that's indefinitely through the end of this year.
Yes.
And as we stay in conversation and communication with Restoration Plaza, we will then move forward and make choices based on that.
Yeah, and we love you all, and your safety is paramount to us. And so we want to make sure that the building is up to par. We want to make sure that we're following all the guidelines issued by the governor and the city. And so we're keeping all of those things in mind, along with the information that we gathered from you all.
Right.
So sit tight through the end of the year, and we will update you about what's happening in 2021. Can you imagine? 2021 is just around the corner.
Yes. And as we are seeing upticks in cases in Brooklyn, in varying neighborhoods, and other neighborhoods are being closely monitored, please, everyone, please continue to do as you've been doing.
Yes.
Wear a mask, physical distancing, limit where you go and how you move. We're in a pandemic, so we can't do as we did, right? We can't operate and move around in the same ways that we did before. So, we don't know what the remainder of the fall will bring, and we don't know what the winter will bring. But unfortunately, we're already seeing some upticks, and so as we love and care about each and every one of you, we want you to be safe and
Absolutely.
healthy. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, what else is popping?
What else is popping?
If you
Prayers
have a
popping.
if you have a prayer request, you can email that prayer request to prayerchampions@celebrationsc.org. We receive the prayer requests along with all of our prayer champions, and all of us collectively together. We hold and know the truth with you. We pray around those things each and every week. And what's most important is that when you send your prayer, when you release your prayer, see it as a release, right? That you're leaving your worry at the door, or at the inbox, the outbox, right? Whatever it is. And know that you have a group of people that are holding the high watch, right? Or that are standing in the highest knowing. Prayer, as Emerson says, prayer is contemplation of facts of life from the highest point of view. We're looking at it from the highest point of view, and then that will support you in accessing that divine guidance, that divine intervention that is absolutely necessary. Also, every Wednesday morning, we hold our Momentum Prayer Call. Wednesday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We encourage and invite you to join us. This is one of those things that you can make a part of your weekly spiritual practice. And it's one of those things that it's a drop. It may seem like an insignificant drop, but over time, that habit and that consistency, it becomes richer. And you find that it really supports you in your day. We share the reading of the daily word that day, and our prayer champion prays a powerful prayer on that morning.
We hope that you'll join us for that Wednesday morning espresso shot, as I like to say. It's an important way to connect with the community, stay connected to the source and the truth, and you can access it anytime, 24/7.
Absolutely. Yeah, that playback number is so important. Make sure you have that, because if 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time doesn't work for you based on your schedule or where you live, you can call in at a time that works for you to tap into the vibration. We will continue to encourage each and every one of you to vote, not how to vote, but that you vote, that you participate. Registration to vote in many states is still happening. In New York, this past Friday was the last day to register, so you can no longer register in New York. But if you're in other states, please check some of the links that we'll show you so that you can still register. If you are able to vote early in your state, if that's an option, please do it. And you can also request an absentee ballot. When you receive that ballot, check it, make sure all the information is correct, and then mail it as soon as possible. If you're choosing to vote on Election Day on November 3rd, it's going to be packed and jammed. The lines are going to be long. We're already seeing, multi-hour waits now for early voting around the country. And so plan accordingly. Bring food or have somebody to bring you food, whatever that looks like, for that day.
Can you get DoorDash at the polls?
I don't know. Somebody needs to look into that.
Somebody needs to look into that.
And also, as PY has reminded us each week, you can only vote once.
Yes.
Right? The current occupant of the White House has falsely claimed that you can vote twice. You cannot. So if you're choosing absentee, then vote absentee. But you can't vote absentee, then show up at the polls. It has to be one or the other. That is not legal.
Yes, make sure that decision is part of your plan. If you're requesting an absentee ballot, make sure you do that as soon as possible. Each state has its own deadlines for when you can request that and the end date for that. So make sure you check that out as well.
I see a question in the comments about where do you go to early vote and how do you do it. This is why these links are so important. You can go to vote.org to get those details. IamAvoter.com or whenweallvote.org, Black Voters Matter Fund, and fairfight.com. Now, for New Yorkers specifically, one of the things that's happening, and it's happening around the country, but specifically in New York, I am aware of this. Barclays Center and Madison Square Garden are going to be open as polling centers. So these will actually be massive locations that can handle large socially or physically distanced crowds for early voting that begins on the 24th here in New York. So if you're in Brooklyn, you can go to Barclays Center. If you're in Manhattan, you could go to Madison Square Garden. But again, I encourage you to go to these links,
yes.
Get the details for each individual state, because it varies state to state. Okay. And finally, one other beautiful thing that we have happening for Election Day is Election Day prayer. So myself and Pastor Yolanda and all of our prayer champions are coming together to hold the high watch, again, to contemplate the facts of life from the highest point of view, to know peace and safety and fairness
and
ease for all involved on that day. And so that prayer will actually be streamed out. So if you're watching us now, it'll be streamed to whatever channel you're watching now, Facebook or YouTube, and it will stream 6 a.m., 12 p.m., afternoon, and 6 p.m. These are all Eastern Standard Time, and so you can easily tap in whatever time feels good to you, and you can also easily share that or even create watch parties if necessary.
Or if you're standing in line on Election Day,
yes.
and you need to be reminded of the truth as you are there, and it's whatever time, one of these broadcast times, turn it on your phone. Absolutely.
Keep some truth in your ears.
Yep, keep it in your ears.
Right?
Brand new flavor in your ears.
Yes. And so I think, before we get out, Pat, I was thinking about the Love Lens. Next Sunday is God Talk Sunday.
Yes.
Third Sunday. Join us. This is your opportunity to ask questions. I know many times, even sometimes during the sermon, people are like popping in comments and questions. I can't answer your questions in the middle of the sermon. That's just not the format for that. But if you have questions, the God Talk is a wonderful place to bring those. Or if you just have questions about, got an email recently, how to apply prayer to a physical condition, right? Different things that are going on. How do you apply these spiritual truths, these metaphysical principles to the realities and real experiences of your life? Or if something you hear just doesn't resonate with you or you want to dig in deeper, that's what the God Talk is all about.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful opportunity also, given what conditions we find ourselves in, to come together and share and witness and support each other. And so we love God Talk, and we're glad it's back.
Yes, yes. And so in order to get the Zoom link and information for the God Talk, you have to be on our mailing list. So we send that out. It's in our weekly email every Friday. So if you're not on our mailing list, I'll just give you this info again. If you're a first-time guest or just not on our mailing list and want to make sure you're on the mailing list, just text the word welcome to this phone number, 347-472-1078. Okay, we'll put you on the mailing list, and then you will have that information this coming Friday in plenty of time for next Sunday.
Yes.
And so next, PY will tell us about the awesomeness that she has going on.
So excited. We have over 600 people from around the world who have already registered for the Lovelands Conversations.
Yes, yes.
We are super excited to be in that environment. We're finding out that people who have been studying A Course in Miracles have been waiting for this, have been waiting for an opportunity to apply this teaching to where we find ourselves. And so it's so important that if you're interested and a student of A Course in Miracles and you want to join us, that you register.
Yeah.
Registration closes on the 19th of October, and the first Lovelands Conversation will be held on the 20th, 12:30 to 1:30. Playbacks will be sent to you once you're registered, and study guides, resource material. We put a lot of love into creating this series, and we want you to join us.
Yes, yes. It's going to be a wonderful time. I've been a fly on the wall witness to some of the conversations and the preparation that these powerful women have been bringing forth, and it's awesome to watch how Spirit creates easily and effortlessly through just the smallest idea, right? A seed. A seed is just a very small idea, but oh my God, what it becomes, right? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So you want to be involved. You want to be involved.
And I see some people have had an opportunity to watch the first conversation. If you're registered, it comes to you automatically, so you'll be ready to join us live on the 20th. And glad that everyone is getting so much out of it. It is and has been driven by love, our individual love of Course in Miracles and each other, and creating a space to heal and talk.
Yes, 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 yes. And so now it is time for meditation.
Yes.
And PY will guide us as she always does, lovingly, easily.
You see, I got my meditation voice up going already. We are in a new month, as we've said, and it's important when we are in the fall season. There's a harvesting, and there's a going within time, and there's a making room time, and many people begin to get rid of things that no longer serve them so that they can make room in their lives. And so this month it's going to be all about, I make room. What am I making room for? I'm making room for more truth. I'm making room for more understanding. I'm making room for more love. And so it's important that we spend our meditative time focused in on this idea. I make room. I make room for God to be there with me in my times of joy. I make room for God to be there with me in my times of sadness. I make room. So let's do that. Let's find a comfortable seat wherever you are in your home, whether you are seated on a sofa, in a chair, seated upright in your bed. That's the beauty of this time. We get to be at home where we are safe and secure. So, find your comfortable seat. And now, let's close our eyes. And the simple act of closing our eyes signals our body that it's time to relax and go within. Go within where the love of God is, surrounds us, invites us, knows us. Go within and let the simple act of closing our eyes release us from the external world, making our way to the internal home. with eyes closed, just take a few moments to notice the breath. The breath that is flowing uninterrupted. Whether that breath is deep or shallow, no judgment. Just notice. And from a place of noticing, experience gratitude that the breath is always moving. Each time we breathe in and out that complete cycle, we remember that we are making room for the next cycle, for the next unfolding, for the next opportunity for love to enter. And now, from this place of noticing, let's take conscious control of the breath by breathing deeply now into our low belly. Inhale. Hold it there for a count of 4. And release for a count of 4. Beautiful. Inhale again. Count of 4. Hold it there. Open the mouth and release on a count of 4. Low belly breath now expands upward. Inhale, up through the rib cage, expanding the front and the sides, the back of the body. Hold it there for a count of 4. And release, count of 4. Again, inhale, count of 4. In and up through the low belly and the rib cage expands. Hold it there for a count of 4. And release, nice and easy, count of 4. Beautiful. Let's extend that breath in and up through the heart, count of 4. Hold it there. And release, nice and easy, count of 4. Again, inhale, count of 4. All the way to the heart. Expands across the front of the chest. Hold it there, count of 4. And release, count of 4. Beautiful. Let's take a few rounds on your own, breathing in, count of 4, holding for 4, and releasing, count of 4. Full, deep, complete breath. Each round making room for more God, more love, more truth, more peace. Last round. Beautiful. Let's begin to move the breath on a wave of relaxation and sending that energy into the feet. Relax the feet. Energy gathers beneath the feet, grounding us, connecting us to the center, the core of the earth and beyond. Feeling that pulsation and that energy rising. And as it crosses each threshold, relaxing each part of our body. Relax the ankles. Energy flowing up the shins and the calves. Relax the shins and the calves. From this surrendered open place, energy flows across the knees. Relax the knees. And as the open channel that we are, energy flows across the thighs, making its way towards our seat of joy, the hips. Relax the thighs, the hamstrings, the glutes, and the hips. As we surrender the lower half of our bodies, energy collects at the base of the spine and now begins to make its ascent, flowing upward, activating the energy, flowing out the crown of the head. In our minds and in our beings, we see energy collected above us all, connecting one to the other in a never-ending cycle of love. We give permission for that energy now to make its way back down through the crown, across the third eye, down, opening the throat, across the shoulders. They relax and release, down the arms, out the fingertips. And from where you are seated, palms can be turned up to receive or turned down to ground. Make room for more energy to flow through every cell. Make room for God to be present in your experience. Make room for answers. Make room for light. And as we prepare for our silent time, scan your body. And if you notice anywhere that you're still holding on, it's okay. Send love there. And make room by relaxing. And beautiful. Last full breath that we take collectively, consciously. Let it fill you. From this moment on, breathing in and out through the nose. I will monitor the time. You take the inward journey. If the mind wanders, it's okay. Bring it back lovingly with the thought, I make room. I make room. I make room for God now. With our eyes still closed, we acknowledge this beautiful time of internal connection, insight, information. We made room for God. We cleared out a space. We let go of anything that would prevent us from being connected to love. With our eyes still closed, we take mental pictures of how good it feels to be connected, to be an open channel. With our eyes still closed, we remember that we are never separate from this love that fills, sustains, uplifts, and inspires us. With our eyes closed, we easily and effortlessly begin to make our return. Maybe that return is signaled by wiggling the fingers and the toes. If the palms are turned up, turn them down and lovingly, easily draw the shoulders up by the ears, expanding the chest, lowering the shoulders down nice and easy. Few rounds, inhaling up. Shoulders draw up nice and easy by the ears, back and down. Last time, inhaling up. Shoulders draw up by the ears, back, and nice and easy they release down. Now bring the palms together at heart center, lightly pressing the thumbs into the sternum. Bow the chin to the fingertips and pause, just to notice how the breath continues to flow in and out. We make room and the breath makes room. From this place of connection, of nice, easy, flowing breath, lovingly flutter the eyes open, taking in a point on the floor in front of you. Soft gaze. Inhale, raise the chin, raise the gaze. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, PY.
Oh, you're welcome.
Awesome. So before we hear from Soul 21, we have a good song on tap. I want to share again the description for our message series this month. The topic, the title, of course, is Releasing Us. By all accounts, we are living in one of the most polarizing times in history. Separation, division, and tribalism seem to be built-in features of the 21st century. Further exacerbated and enabled by social media, it seems to be harder and harder for any of us to find common ground or reach a common purpose. In 2019, Academy Award-winning writer Jordan Peele released the movie Us to much acclaim. Us tells the story of a black family's beach vacation that takes a chaotic turn when they are confronted and terrorized by their doppelgangers called the Tethers. In a podcast interview, Peele explains what the movie is about. This movie is about maybe the monster is you. It's about us, looking at ourselves as individuals and as a group. The protagonist in the movie is the surrogate for the audience, so it felt like at the end of the day, I wasn't doing my core theme any justice if I wasn't revealing that we have been the bad guy in this movie. If the monster is us, what does that mean for our future? Learning to release our addiction to us sets us on the path to we. With a renewed sense of our interconnectedness, we can heal and solve the great challenges of our time. This month, we will heal the roots of separation, release us, and create the space to embrace the beauty of we. And my topic today is Show Me Some ID. So we'll get into that after we hear from Soul 21. There's a word that we hear used often in spiritual and religious circles, and that word is surrender. And it's a word that's often misunderstood because we think that we must surrender when our back is against the wall. We think that surrender is a giving up. We feel many times that surrender means that we lost something. But as I love to define surrender, surrender is simply extraordinary trust. And when you understand who and what this thing is that we choose to call God, call it source, universe, whatever feels good to you, when you understand who and what that is and your relationship to it and your ever connection to it, that is then and how you can trust in it. That is then and how you can surrender to it. In the same way that you surrender to the pilot when you sit down on your seat on the plane, knowing that you don't have to worry about the instruments, knowing you don't have to worry about, you don't vet the pilot's training or certifications. You surrender, yes, yes? Yes. You place extraordinary trust in the hands of those pilots, yes, yes? Yes. And so this is how we must learn to operate with this thing that we cannot see, taste, touch, or smell, and yet it is. And so as I was contemplating this idea of surrender a few years back, this song came to me. I will trust you.
I will trust you. I will trust you. I will trust you, God, always with my whole heart. With my whole life, I will trust you, God, always. I will trust you. I will trust you. I will trust you, God, always with my whole heart. With my whole life, I will trust you.
Hey everybody. I'm not sure what just happened. Everything just crashed, so we're gonna go back into the song and move forward from there. Mm-hmm. All right. There's a word that we hear used often in spiritual and religious circles, and that word is surrender. And it's a word that's often misunderstood because we think that we must surrender when our back is against the wall. We think that surrender is a giving up. We feel many times that surrender means that we lost something. But as I love to define surrender, surrender is simply extraordinary trust. And when you understand who and what this thing is that we choose to call God, call it source, universe, whatever feels good to you, when you understand who and what that is and your relationship to it and your ever connection to it, that is then and how you can trust in it. That is then and how you can surrender to it. In the same way that you surrender to the pilot when you sit down on your seat on the plane, knowing that you don't have to worry about the instruments, knowing you don't have to worry about, you don't vet the pilot's training or certifications. You surrender, yes, yes? Yes. You place extraordinary trust in the hands of those pilots, yes, yes? Yes. And so this is how we must learn to operate with this thing that we cannot see, taste, touch, or smell, and yet it is. And so as I was contemplating this idea of surrender a few years back, this song came to me. I will trust you.
I will trust you. I will trust you. I will trust you, God, always with my whole heart. With my
Yes, yes. Even with the live stream, we operate in extraordinary trust. And I'm so grateful and thankful for this technology that allows us to connect together and reconnect together, no matter what's happening or what's going on. Well, I want to get into the message because I have some things to share and some things to talk about. And so I invite you to just kind of strap in and take this ride with me. Now, last week we began this series with the sermon "Was Blind, But Now I See." And what I shared in that sermon was this idea that if we're going to move from us to we have to take a new look and have an understanding of this idea of blindness or being colorblind, how problematic that is. Because actually to be blind is to then be without information, without knowledge, without facts. And then we moved forward into talking about how ultimately we need to understand oneness, right? That people want to say they're colorblind because, oh, spirit has no color and, we're all one. But actually within the oneness is the multiplicity. And I shared how that is reflected in the beauty of the rainbow and the truth of how light actually works. I pray that met you where you are. You can always go back on YouTube or Facebook to watch that. This week I was thinking about something. There was a wonderful article that I read in Wired magazine that was talking about something new that's happened in the world of DNA testing, DNA to determine your ethnicity, and specifically Ancestry.com, which is, I think, globally one of the most popular. They just released what they're calling a new ethnicity estimate. And what that's done is it's changed what some of the percentages were for certain people. It's completely, in some cases, taken away what some regional ethnicities were given to certain people. And so the public reaction revealed some things that are highly problematic about how we understand race and ethnicity. And so this Wired magazine article is entitled, "Your Ethnicity Estimate Doesn't Mean What You Think It Does." And so one of the things that we see is that as people were getting their new ethnicity estimates, they started to tweet things like, someone said, "Oh, now I have a greater understanding of why I like whiskey." Right? Someone else, an American woman, blamed her Scottish ancestry for her loud mouth, while another man seemed more distressed by the news. He tweeted, "Help before I go out and buy a kilt." But the article says the social media reaction suggests an erroneous belief. One that these companies marketing sometimes help advance, that race and ethnicity are genetically determined and that they tell you something about your essential nature. Right? This is very important. After the recent Ancestry update, another user tweeted, "I'm a little excited that I've consistently been getting Korean traces of ancestry, however tiny. I've always been drawn to Korea. Those traces might be evidence of a distant Korean ancestor, sure, or they could be a statistical mishap." So all of a sudden this person is like, "Oh yeah, I've just been so drawn to Korea," when it might not even really be the truth, right? And further, your ethnic ancestry does not tell you about who you are or tell you something about, as the article says here, your essential nature. Now, the scientists that were interviewed put it this way: "I don't like to use the words ethnicity or race in science because these things are not really determined by science," says Janita Jeff, a population geneticist who hosts the podcast In Those Genes, where she uncovers lost African American identities through genetics. Particularly when we talk about the African genome, if we use the word ethnicity, we are completely erasing hundreds and sometimes thousands of cultures. Throughout history, Africa has been home to thousands of tribes with distinct cultures, religions, and languages that aren't captured in genetics companies' larger ethnic regions and don't map onto genetic categories. When I think of ethnicity," Jeff continues, "I think of a cultural identification or expression which may or may not align with your genetic ancestry." This is very interesting. Hear this. When I think of ethnicity, I think of a cultural identification or expression which may or may not align with your genetic ancestry. Right? So if we think about it, as an American, being an American is part of my ethnicity. That may or may not align with my genetic ancestry, right? But my cultural identification and expressions, if I go anywhere in the world, as soon as I begin to talk, as soon as I begin to share a few things about myself, sometimes even the way I dress, would say, oh, he's an American. It's one of the things that I love about reading the writings of Richard Wright and James Baldwin and talking about leaving the United States. One of the things that they found is when they moved out of the United States, they realized how American they were, right? As African Americans, as Black people, many times we want to get out of the country because of all the racism. But then you find out you have this whole other ethnic identity, this Western identity, this American identity that you didn't realize was just as loud as everything else. And so this idea about identity got me to thinking about so many things because each of us, if we think about it, we have almost an endless number of identities or identifications. Some we're born with, some we choose, others we acquire through our lifetime, right? I was born male, right? Right? But I'm a parent. I became a parent, right? At the age of 25. That wasn't, but, and to be clear, as a male, I could identify and think and talk and act a certain way, or believe that the world works a certain way because of that, or believe that the world should respond to me a certain way because of that. And then as a parent, right? Parents, we have our own code and our own language. And once you find out someone's a parent, you connect around that and you start to tell stories or ask questions about your kid and tell stories about, oh, when your kid was sick, or well, what did you do about school, right? All of these different things. We take these identities. I'm African American, right? I was born African American. I'm a musician. I became a musician, right? I'm a pastor. I'm a Maryland native, but now I'm a New Yorker, right? And each of those are very specific identities that I can, wear like a badge of honor. I can also wear to tribalize or separate myself out from. Right. I was thinking about so many other things. Being born and raised in the Pentecostal church is an identity, right? There's a whole language and culture and music and phrases and phraseology that goes along with that, right? And when I identify someone that grew up in that same circle, all of a sudden it's like we're speaking a different language because it's a shared, through the shared common experience, right? And so we could go through so many others, right? I love MSNBC, right? What does it mean to be a person that watches MSNBC versus Fox News, right? And you can separate yourself and make certain declarations about yourself and about life based on that. And then, of course, our sun signs are another way that we identify, right? And we could go on and on. I'm just outlining a few things here because I think it's important for us to understand that we have all of these identities. They are sometimes endless, right? If you really start to think through all of the ways that we identify. And our identities are important. They inform and they shape our world. Our identity is the lens through which we understand ourselves, and it's also how we connect to the rest of the world. And our identity can be a huge roadblock from us to we. And so we're going to look at how and where our identity can be a problem, how many times our identity is developed, and what the solution is to the problem of identity. The first thing to note, it's a fundamental spiritual idea. All of you know it. All of you have heard it in some form or fashion. Your identity is not who you are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. Notice that the identities that I just shared about myself, and I'm sure the identities that come up for you as I just went through my own list, are all based in our human experience. They are endless, right? Your identity could be somebody that only wears the color blue, right? There are people on this planet that only wear one color, right? That's their identity. But that's all tapped into the human experience. But the first thing to note, no matter what your identity is, right? No matter how beautiful your identity is, no matter how multifaceted your identity is, no matter how inspiring your identity is, no matter how beneficial to yourself or others your identity or identities may be, your identity is not who you are. The truth of life, the truth of yourself, is that you are always a spiritual being having a human experience. And so one of the ways that then becomes a problem when we confuse our identity with who and what we are, we then begin to operate in what Dr. David Hawkins calls in Power versus Force, the level of pride, right? And he uses this word specifically, and this is what he writes in the text. The problem, as we all know, is that pride goeth before the fall. And I encourage you to hear, when I use the word pride, think about identity. Actually, I'll just shift the word here. The problem, as we all know, is that identity goeth before the fall. Identity is defensive and vulnerable because it's dependent upon external conditions. Remember, I said our identity is all rooted in our humanness. And yet the truth is we are a spiritual being having a human experience. And so anything that has you solely thinking, operating, acting as though you are only human and not acknowledging that you are first, before you are human, you are a spiritual being incarnating into a human experience, then you're dependent upon external conditions. And he goes on, without it, you can suddenly revert to a lower level. The inflated ego is vulnerable to attack. Identity remains weak because it can be knocked off its pedestal back to shame, which is the threat that fires the fear of loss and pride. Identity is divisive and gives rise to factionalism. The consequences are costly. And this is why I say this. This is so important. If we're talking about moving from us to we, and we're looking at what's happening in our world and what's happening on our planet, and why it makes no sense that we cannot come together around the common purpose of the existential threat of climate change, right? We watched Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence this past week in the debate. Like, he couldn't even just acknowledge what's real in terms of climate change, right? Because he's factionalized, right? He's identifying, he's sitting over here in this camp. I cannot leave this camp, even though there may be some other realities on the ground. And the consequences, as Hawkins writes, are costly. The downside of identity is arrogance and denial. These characteristics block growth. In identity, recovery from addictions is impossible because emotional problems or character defects are denied. The whole problem of denial is one of identity. Thus, identity is a very sizable block to the acquisition of real power. Right? This is very, very, very interesting that we can identify, and I encourage you to go back. There's a sermon from last year, The Whole World in Your Hands. And I believe it was around last year, this time. I know it was not before the election. And Lao Tzu speaks to this idea of, as I break down in that text and in that sermon, of you must let go of your male side and your female side, right? That if you're identifying in any way, what you're actually doing is then you're blocking yourself off from an experience of power. And Lao Tzu speaks to that very thing in that text. So I invite you to go back to there. That'll support you in this message, The Whole World in Your Hands. So we recognize then this is the problem of identity, right? And what does this look like out in the real world? Right? We see the COVID-19 pandemic is showing us the problem of identity. Right? We have armed white terrorists that are storming the Capitol in Michigan, and the plot, the horrific plot, right, to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Right? This is rooted in tribalism and identity and factionalism. And they can't see anything else. They can't see anybody else. They can't see how their actions and reactions affect the rest of the country, affect the rest of their world, even immediately affect their immediate families, because now they're arrested. Right? So if they got kids, if they have wives, girlfriends, partners, right? Now they're all just out here. And you know, these guys are in jail, right? They weren't thinking about anything else except how they identify. What we're also seeing here in Brooklyn, right, with the Orthodox Jews this past week in protest to the new lockdown measures that are enacted in certain zip codes. There were, protests at night, and they burned masks and effigies, and they even assaulted a cameraman who was documenting what was happening, and ugly words were being spewed out at our leaders. And it was really disheartening to see. But I recognize that this is all rooted rooted in identity, right? Because what's happening for our sisters and brothers, the Orthodox Jews, they feel like they're being persecuted, right? These lockdown measures do not allow them to practice their faith, do not allow them to practice their rituals and all the things that keep them connected. What we need right now, right? We need to have things that keep us connected to source, to spirit, to understand that there's something greater than us. All of those practices they really can't do with these lockdowns. And so they're so tied to that identity that they're not seeing or thinking about the wider good, right? They're not even seeing or thinking about the ways in which the Torah says that above all else, right? Yes, you have all of these practices and you have all of these laws that you must adhere to, but above all else, if not doing those things will save a life, that is the highest order, right? This is why when we read in the scripture, when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment, right? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second is like the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. But see, when we're tied to our identity, we can't even hear the second is like the first, right? They're operating in this sense of tribalism. And so when we think our identity is who we are, we cannot see anyone or anything else but our tribe. And that's why it was important that we started last week with this idea of I was blind, but now I see. That we have to understand the problem with blindness, right? We have to understand the problem with retreating into the house of blindness, as so many so-called spiritual people do. We have to understand the problem with focusing on oneness as it is the highest truth, but then not understanding how it expresses that out in the world. And so making ourselves blind and missing a bunch of facts. But how else does this look out in the world, this identity, when it's problematic, when we think that our identity is who we are, when we forget that we're spiritual beings having a human experience? There's a social media post that's been circulating around. I've been seeing a lot of people post it that says that extreme independence is a trauma response, right? I know many of you have seen it. It's been circulating for months, but particularly this past week, I think I've seen so many people post it. And similar to that idea, I saw an Instagram post this week that said, to avoid disappointment, expect nothing from nobody. Identity is not who we are, but here's the other thing. You want to know how identity shows up in the world? Some of your identity may have been shaped by trauma. And this is an important thing for us to understand, because there are so many ways that we're, putting a flag down in the ground. This is who I am. This is my truth. This is what I'm doing. I'm saying it anyway. We live in this place and we don't understand that what may actually be going on is that we are operating in a trauma response, right? Because extreme independence, in this case, is a trauma response in the sense that you've been disappointed so much. You had parents or elders and caregivers that didn't show up in the way that they needed to show up, or you needed them to show up. And so you've created this survivalist mentality that I don't need anyone, right? But that's a trauma response, but it's become a part of your identity. Right? Many of us have developed these habits simply to survive. Unquestioned and unhealed, they become a part of our identity, and then they become a part of how we connect to the outside world. Here's a simple example. And this is just something that's coming up. This may not be you, but it's just an idea, a thought. So think about it. Something as simple as if you are a person that you cannot sleep unless the light is on. Right? There are a lot of people like that, right? You can't sleep unless the light is on, or unless the television is on, right? Some kind of light has to be on, right? Now, this habit could have been formed for many valid reasons related to trauma. If there was domestic violence in the home as a child, you might have kept that light on because that created a sense of safety. Right? Or if there was abuse or molestation, right? Maybe if you lived in a violent neighborhood and there were lots of shootings, right? You need that light on so you can see what's going on again, or just to feel a sense of safety. Or if there were adults in your home that were arguing and fighting, that may be the original reason why you needed to have that light on to be able to sleep. But then all of a sudden you fast forward to adulthood and you're in a relationship, you're with your partner, your spouse, whomever it may be, and they go to turn the light off. and you have a reaction. No, I need the light on, right? And them not having that same identity, them not having that same experience would be like, well, I don't get it. What's going on? And at that moment, the trigger happens, and you may find yourself feeling like you not only would you take offense, why can't we keep it on? Don't you love me? Don't, and it's like, well, yeah, I love you, but the light has nothing to do with loving you. And then all of a sudden you may become defensive, which is always a clue when we understand to if we're operating in our identity from a loving place or not, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we can become defensive and easily offended. But what's really going on is that many times our identity is shaped by trauma, and we have to be aware of that, right? And again, we're going to talk about some of the remedies. But even going back to thinking about the Orthodox Jews here in Brooklyn, this is part of what's going on, right? One of the things we know is that the Orthodox communities here are the direct ancestors of those that experienced the Holocaust, right? They were those that got away. But millions of their family members, brothers, sisters, grandmothers, aunts, cousins, children were murdered. And they were able to flee that horrific experience and find safety and community here in the United States. But what happened is this community created community from their trauma. There wasn't healing that happened first. That's a big question that's always asked. If we think about enslaved Africans and we think about those who survived the Holocaust, what would their lives look like if they had received therapy, right? If they had had many of the modalities and things that we know and understand now. That wasn't available, right? And they did the best that they can. And so the community, the Orthodox community, was founded and is rooted in this trauma. And that's why there's such a closing off and a cutting off. So within the community, many of them aren't even fully aware of what's happening related to the pandemic because they're not reading the news. There's not access to the internet. There's a whole lot that's going on that actually only certain people have access. And then there's a lot of preaching and teaching about how evil the external world is. And so in the midst of that, then they're being told they can't practice and be who they are. And so a lot of what's happening here, they're offendedness and defensiveness around their identity is really rooted and shaped in trauma. Now, I'm not just harping on the Orthodox Jews. Let's talk about my brothers and sisters, highly melanated brothers and sisters, right? So there's a couple things. You've heard us speak many times about Dr. Joy DeGruy and her work of post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is really all about outlining many of the trauma responses, ways in which we as Black people have identified ways of being that may or may not be to our benefit. They were to our benefit to survive. They were to our ancestors' benefit to survive the horrors of slavery. But because they were never healed, because there wasn't therapy, we are all, as African Americans, operating in some level of post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? And so this is then how and why I was thinking about it this morning. We can get someone like Attorney General Daniel Cameron in Kentucky who's operating in a way that's against himself, that's against his ancestors, that's against people that look like him. But if you understand that the identity that he's choosing right now is shaped by trauma that's been experienced, it starts to make a little bit more sense. And another thing I was thinking about in terms of African Americans, as it relates to COVID-19, I don't know about y'all, but I'm not really excited about this vaccine. Now, what do I mean? The trauma that African Americans have experienced when it comes to medicine, right? And this wonderful world of medical world in the United States and in the Western world, there's so many awful things that have happened to Black people that we ain't just running to take the first vaccine that becomes available. Now, there are beautiful things that are happening. I know that the presidents of several HBCUs are personally participating in some of the clinical trials, because what's true is Black and brown people are dying disproportionately of COVID-19 than anyone else. And at the same time, we are the least likely to want to take the vaccine because of the trauma. And so we're sitting in an identity that's rooted and shaped in trauma. And yet at the same time, that identity rooted and shaped in trauma may keep us from living. You see what happens? This is again why I love what Dr. David Hawkins talks about, right? He says pride is divisive and gives rise to factionalism, and the consequences are costly. That we can live in this identity, and I see y'all in the comments, right? And black folks, we have conversations between each other all the time. Yeah, I ain't taking that back. Yeah, you taking that, right? Because we understand. But in that conversation, right, in identifying and sectioning ourselves off, we also may be cutting ourselves off from the very thing that will support us in living and thriving, right? And so this is, again, why we have to understand and look at how identity can be very problematic. One, because it's not who we are. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And next, much or not much, some of our identity, that's what I wrote here, some may be informed by trauma. And so we have to be aware of that. So what do we do? What do we do? How do we live in a way that honors our identity, and yet at the same time, knowing that our identity is not who we are? And the answer is very simple. It's just one word: empathy. How do we get from us to we? How do we get out of living at this level of pride where we're factionalizing, this level of pride that gives birth to terrorism, this level of pride that gives birth to religious factionalism and religious oppression? Empathy. But when I use this word, I want us to understand what it is, right? And so we're going to look at empathy as compared to sympathy and also pity. I also, originally I was toying with, I was going to say we need radical empathy. But I'm doing my best to pull away from that, right? In the same way that we say, we talk about practicing extreme self-care. And you may have heard me say in the past that the only reason that we say we need to practice extreme self-care is because we ain't practicing no care, right? If you would just practice self-care, it wouldn't be extreme, or it wouldn't seem extreme. And so in the same way, it's not that empathy needs to be radicalized, it just needs to be practiced. It needs to be understood and practiced. And so when we talk about empathy, what are we talking about? And I love how this was highlighted. There's another article that I was in, I wanted to include here from Inc. magazine, talking about the words empathy, sympathy, and pity. And we read here about empathy. It's the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. The key for our present purposes is that empathy involves an action, actively attempting to experience someone else's feelings or thoughts. It's about trying to put yourself in another person's shoes, to be colloquial. Empathy requires effort sometimes a heck of a lot of effort. And the writer goes on then to talk about sympathy. First, starting with the dictionary definition, sympathy is an affinity, association, or relationship between persons or things wherein whatever affects one similarly affects the other. The concepts of empathy and sympathy do have a lot in common, but sympathy involves a more automatic or involuntary affinity. Empathy, as we've seen, differs in that it involves a state of understanding reached by active effort. As an example, I might almost automatically sympathize with the feelings of someone who grew up in the same hometown that I did and who has a life story that sounds similar to mine. But I would have to work harder to empathize with someone who lives in a different country than I do and who has had a very different life experience. Empathy, sympathy, and then pity. Our final word is pity, defined as the feeling of sorrow and compassion caused by the suffering and misfortunes of others. The keys for us here are twofold. First, that the person feeling pity does feel something, but it's sorrow in reaction to the feelings of others, not a shared emotional understanding of the other person's feelings. Pity creates separation. Pity keeps you in us. That's subtle but crucial. It's like the fact that someone else is cold makes you feel sorry for them, but doesn't suggest that you actually feel the cold. Second, and related, you can feel pity without sympathy. In fact, pity carries with it a connotation that you explicitly aren't in the same emotional position as another person. Instead, your position is higher than theirs. And so often, many times what we do, we may understand and we start to see these differences, but we can stay in separation. We can stay in us when we're operating in pity. But the opportunity is to operate in empathy. And what I love here is the writer tells us so very clearly that empathy differs from sympathy in that it's a state of understanding reached by active effort. Empathy requires effort. It requires you to do something. It requires first an awareness, but then actually moving into that awareness to see differently, moving into that awareness to actually let go of your blinders. So again, I've said that your identity is not who you are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. And some of your identity may be shaped by trauma. And so what is the answer? The answer is empathy. And so I want to dig a little deeper. Brene Brown, she writes and she talks about empathy. And she says simply that empathy is a choice. And she says it's a vulnerable one. Now we're going to talk about what that means because that's a loaded word. But empathy is a choice and it's a vulnerable one. And she shares that through her research in looking at empathy and how it's practiced, she says that practicing empathy requires 4 things. 1, it requires perspective taking, or putting yourself in someone's shoes. That's the same thing we just read from the Inc. magazine article, right? That's the first thing that's required for empathy. 2, staying out of judgment and listening. Let's all take a breath on that. It's an easy way to practice empathy, to move into that place, right? Maybe you can put yourself in someone's shoes and try to imagine maybe you're sympathizing, but then empathy has you staying out of judgment and just listening. You don't immediately go to, well, why did she do that? Why did she go over there? I don't know why she did that anyway, right? None of that. We stay out of judgment and we just listen. What's interesting about when we're practicing empathy, particularly one-on-one, often it's not that you have to say anything, right? It's the being there. It's the holding space. Number 3, recognizing emotion in another person that you have maybe felt before, right? Because what's interesting is you may not be able to identify with the experience, but you can maybe identify with the emotion. We've all felt fear, right? We've all felt disappointed. We've all felt sad. We've all felt maybe betrayed, right? You may not agree with why they think they were betrayed, right? That's not important. Empathy is like, wait, I know what this feels like. I know how it felt when I was, in that space, in that place. And I know it would have been wonderful to have someone that just could say, I understand, and just to be there with me. And finally, communicating that you recognize that emotion, right? But as I said, she uses a word, vulnerable. It's a word she uses a lot in her writing, right? She says empathy is a choice and it's a vulnerable one. And so we gotta debunk what that's about. And she does that wonderfully in her book, Daring Greatly, in chapter 2, Debunking the Vulnerability Myths. And this is what's interesting. I think it's the reason why it's so hard for people to step out of their identity, and why folks want to stay tethered in their identity of judging or not listening or only protecting your tribe, because they think that stepping out of their identity makes them vulnerable. But it's a misunderstanding of what vulnerable means. So the first myth is that vulnerability is weakness. Being vulnerable has nothing to do with being weak, right? The next myth, she says, is that the myth of I don't do vulnerability. Now, as she defines it in the text in Daring Greatly, she writes about this idea that what she means by being vulnerable is expressing emotion. Saying I'm sad Everybody feels sad, even if they don't say it. So to say I don't do vulnerable would actually mean that you're cut off from all emotion. You don't experience emotions, right? That's not true. The next one is vulnerability is letting it all hang out, right? So many people, they choose to be vulnerable, and unfortunately they start to, just really spew out all of their problems and concerns and issues, right, in the name of being vulnerable. And that's not what it is. And then finally, the vulnerability myth is that we can go it alone, right? So as we just highlighted earlier, that extreme independence is a trauma response, right? So often people are refusing to release and relinquish their identity because they're operating in this place of I don't need anyone, I don't need anybody to care about me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a vulnerability myth. And so what's interesting, now here's the spiritual idea, because Brene Brown is not a minister or a pastor or a spiritual teacher, and so she's operating through a certain lens in a certain space, and it's absolutely valid when she says empathy is a choice and it's a vulnerable one. But as a pastor and as a spiritual teacher, I'm going to take it to this next level, because I think this is where it's important for each and every one of us. Because if we understand what's going on, that practicing empathy requires us to step outside of our identities, that's actually a good thing. That, as she says, it's a vulnerable one. But what I want you to understand is that in the sense that vulnerability is not weakness, when we step outside of our human identities, what we are then doing is revealing our spiritual identity. I need you to hear this, because this is everything. See, the truth of life is the only way that you're ever going to connect, the only way that you're ever going to practice empathy, the only way that you're ever going to see someone's other side of the story, the only way you're ever going to tap into someone else's shoes and feel what they feel is you would have to reveal your spiritual identity, because your spiritual identity is one with the all that is. And so from that place of oneness, that is how you're able to then experience and understand the individual expression that is expressing as your sister, as your brother, as your fellow human being. And so it's interesting because A Course in Miracles, Lord, okay, here we go. So A Course in Miracles uses a better word for this, invulnerable. You've heard us teach on it. You've heard Pastor Yolanda speak of this many, many, many times. And so this is what we're really after. When Brene Brown says empathy is a choice, and what I add to that is empathy is a choice, and it reveals your invulnerability. Because the only way that you could ever understand someone, it is your invulnerable, spiritual, divine self that connects. It is your invulnerable, spiritual, divine self that heals. It is your invulnerable, spiritual, divine self that steps into another's shoes, that listens, that is patient, that loves. Empathy is an expression of love. And the only way you ever get to that is to get back to this reality of I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. Yes, I identify in this way. Yes, I identify with this tribe. Yes, I identify with this faction. Yes, I identify with this way of seeing. Yes, I identify with this way of being. Yes, I identify with this way of watching TV. Yes, I identify with this way of dressing. Yes, I identify with this way of speaking. Yes, I identify with this way of churching. Yes, I identify with this way of foodieing, right? But at the end of the day, the ultimate truth is that you are invulnerable because you are a spiritual being. That which you cannot fully taste, touch, or smell in this experience of life, and yet it is eternal. It cannot be hurt or harmed. And so in truth, this is the only identification that matters. I believe the world is asking us to show me some ID. And so the question becomes, how will you answer the call for love? It's easy to show the identification of, oh, I'm a man, and I'm going to operate this way. Women, yeah, whatever. Y'all, that's what y'all experience, whatever. Trans people, that's what y'all experience, whatever. But I know the truth. When I show my ID says spiritual being. When I show my ID says one with and one of love. When I show my ID, it says that I'm one with all. And so it is from that vantage point, it is from that place that then I can look at my sisters and brothers in the Orthodox community that are burning masks, and I understand what's really going on. And I can step back and empathize. It is from that place of showing my real ID that I can look at my brothers and sisters, black and brown, that are afraid to take the vaccine based on a traumatic experience of our ancestors. And I say, I get it. I can look at a mother that won't honor the good grades and the good academic progress that her child is making in school, even when other parents or their teachers are admonishing the accolades of this child, because I recognize how that was a trauma response, that mothers that were enslaved didn't want to speak well of their children or have the master thinking that their children were valuable because they would be sold off. I understand. I can empathize. Because I'm operating from this perspective that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. I pick up these human experiences. I pick up this soul clothing. I pick up these soul identities, and I put them down just as easily. And so with that, I invite everybody to take a deep breath in and exhale. And we breathe in and we breathe out. There is only one mind, only one power, only one presence. It is working in all, through all, and as all. It is working in me, through me, and as me. It is working in you, through you, and as you. For we are one within and one of it. This divine intelligence, this divine love, this divine healing and healer. We are one with it and one of it. And it is right here, right now, for it neither comes nor goes. Closer than our hand and closer than our breath, God is here now. And it is out of the recognition that God is here now, I speak this word in faith, remembering and celebrating this truth that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. I am grateful for the human experience. I'm grateful for all of the wonderful things that we are able to take part in this human experience. And yet I know it is all temporary. And yet I know it is all not the ultimate identifier of who and what we are. So right here and right now, as we contemplate the facts of life from the highest point of view, we choose to practice and look through the lens of empathy. We choose to listen and not judge. We choose to communicate that we understand the emotion. We choose to identify that emotion from our own experience. We choose to put ourselves in our sisters' and brothers' shoes, because in truth, there's only one of us here. Right here and right now, my sister, I'm in your shoes. Right here and right now, my brother, I am in your shoes. Right here and right now, my fellow human, I am in your shoes. And from this vantage point, I hold space. From this vantage point, I practice love. From this vantage point, I show you my ID, and it simply says spiritual being. So it is with joy and thanksgiving that I release this prayer, knowing that each and every one of us are making a new commitment to practice empathy with ourselves, to see the ways in which we have shaped our identity through the lens of trauma, to see the ways in which we have identified that keep us cut off and separate from others. We forgive ourselves and we set ourselves free. And we now go forth, being the beloved community. We now go forth, being divine, loving souls that heal the planet one connection at a time. So with joy, with thanksgiving, I simply say, amen, ashe, and so it is. So it is.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You couldn't see me over here, but I was like, yes, yes. Powerful message. We've got to be aware of our trauma and heal our trauma. We also have to develop a level of empathy for ourselves and our brothers and sisters. And it is so important in moving us along this continuum, releasing us and moving towards we.
Yeah.
We have no conscious idea of what has impacted our development of what we call our identity. Right. But once we find it, once we become aware of it, we no longer blame anyone. Mm-hmm. We heal it.
Yeah.
we heal it, or we support others in healing it.
Yes.
That's why we always talk about these ideas, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Because the thing about post-traumatic slave syndrome, it didn't just impact people of color.
Talk about it.
It impacts everyone who witnessed it, who partook in it, who stood back and didn't do anything about it. They too were impacted by it.
Yes.
What it impacted? Their ability to have empathy. How could you not blind yourself? If you see something happening, you would have to disassociate yourself. But what happens when you disassociate? You can't have empathy.
Exactly.
You can't have empathy.
Exactly.
And so our white brothers and sisters, we can see how they can operate in their own trauma based on denial. And the result is no empathy.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's important for us all to understand the history of our country, to understand how we've all been traumatized respectively, and to no longer deny it, but to heal it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We got to release us all and move to this we.
There it is. There it is. We're all in bondage.
We're all in bondage.
Yeah. Lord have mercy.
Ooh.
Well, thank you all for taking this ride. I pray that this message has met you where you are, and again, it may be something you want to go back to.
Yes.
There's a wonderful little short video that Brene Brown has on empathy that we'll probably share on Facebook at some point this week, because it's a nice visual. It has a cartoon that goes with it. But all in all, if you take those 4 ideas and first think about, how do I practice this for myself? It always starts with self, right? Please don't go out trying to be empathetic with somebody else if you haven't been empathetic with yourself.
If you haven't healed your own trauma, there's no way.
Right. And so then, because then it becomes very easy, it becomes automatic. We're going to talk about forgiveness next week, which is one of the other pieces of going from us to we. And that starts with self as well, right? Like, you can't, your ability to forgive and operate in forgiveness of others, it happens by learning self-forgiveness first, right? But that's next week. So in this moment, it is time.
Series, y'all.
Yes.
Y'all feeling it? I'm feeling it.
It is time for giving. You see the information here on your screen. If you have not already given, it's very easy. And we simply say, give what feels good, because we recognize that giving must be tied to joy, right? The vibration, the emotional state and tone that you're in when you're giving is what fuels the process of this law of circulation. As you give, you receive. That's always true. And you always succeed. So if you're giving out of fear, shame, and guilt, then those are the seeds that you're planting, and that's what's going to show up in the garden of your mind and the garden of your life. And so if you're developing that good feeling tone, you give from that place, then that's what's going to show up in the garden of your mind and the garden of your life. The information is here on the screen, celebrationsc.org/give, or just scroll down to the giving section. And if you would like to text to give, the number is 347-744-9500. There is a $10 minimum to text to give because of the fees associated with that. And so when we give in love, because we love to give, when we give in joy, because there's so much joy here for us all, then we affirm this powerful truth. All the money that I use returns to me multiplied. In a never-ending cycle. Of increase. And enjoyment. And with that, we say happy Sunday again to you all. Have an amazing day. We love you. Have an even better week. We look forward to seeing many of you on the prayer call on Wednesday morning. And if not there, then of course we will all be connected again next Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right.
Love you all.
Love y'all. Bye for now.
Bye for now.